Welcome to our webinar on preparing for the unexpected, 10 things managers need to know. This is the fifth in a series of webinars that the Labor and Employment and Human Resources Practice Group at the Wagner Law Group will be offering. This presentation will last about 30 minutes, and the slides from the webinar will be available on the Wagner Law Group website. Let me introduce David Gabor of counsel with the Wagner Law Group. David is a recognized leader in the employment law field. He represents clients in litigation, the negotiation and drafting of contracts, handling compliance issues, the creation of corporate infrastructure, the drafting of policies, training of employees, and leading companies towards organizational excellence. David was recently selected by the Advisory Board of the Litigation Council of America for a fellowship in the Society. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for joining me today. I submit for your consideration that we take steps every day to avoid problems when driving cars. Problems can range from speeding tickets to serious accidents. People prepare for these events by wearing seatbelts and maintaining auto insurance. There was a time when people did not wear seatbelts, but now that has become a reflex reaction when you get in the car for most people. And there's no reason why we cannot take a few minutes to make sure that preparing for the unexpected can become a norm in our business lives as well. People frown at those who create unneeded risk by, for example, texting and driving. If you look at the picture in the middle, you can see a person who's texting and paying no attention to the road, and there are pedestrians in front of that driver, or the person pushing the stroller up the escalator. When Sandy hit back in late October, the estimates of the damage caused to business interruption and property damage were in excess of $60 billion. There were extended power outages in the regions affected by the storm. There were fuel shortages, gas rationing, and many, many other horrible things that happened to the people in those regions. Sandy's impact will likely be felt by many for years to come. In the aftermath of Sandy, many of my clients reached out to me with questions, ranging from questions about payroll policies and practices to insurance claims, to property damage, to other personnel issues. Colleagues from other companies in the areas that were most affected shared horror stories about what happened to their business and in their personal lives. And what struck me was that some of the problems that were shared with me were avoidable, and that's what prompted me to want to do this webinar today. Now, most of us have piles of work on our desks. This has got to get done before the end of the week. I really need to get on that project. I would really like to get to that, and when it gets quiet, I will look into it. When we prioritize our work, unfortunately, things like preparing for the unexpected fall into the when it gets quiet, I will look into it category. And that creates massive risk for people. The risk of putting things off can lead to employee confusion and frustration. If employees don't have clear direction from the company of what to do when there is an event that takes place, they get frustrated. We run the risk of losing data. We're going to talk about that quite a bit today. We also run the risk of losing hard files if there's a flood or some form of a disaster. The inability to reach or collaborate with key employees of the business becomes a risk if we don't prepare in advance. The inability to reach customers or vendors. We'll talk a bit about both of those during the program today. And we've got to be able to meet our responsibilities even if there's been an interruption to our business. We're going to also talk about when vendors are unable to deliver their products to us as well. What we really need to do is take those steps to minimize this business risk And this is really no different at the end of the day than avoiding the other risks that we experience on a day-by-day basis. Events that take place could be a blackout. It could be a storm. There could be a fire. There could be a flood. There also can be a crash of your computer system. Trust me, I don't think these types of events ever take place at a convenient time, and they usually don't have much notice. So we're going to explore these types of events and the steps we can take to prepare for them. We're going to manage this preparedness so that the time taken is de minimis and the benefits often can save a business. So when we're going to close the business for a day or a portion of a day, one of the most important things is how do we communicate that message to our employees? We need to have a plan in place so we know how to communicate to different people and make sure the message gets out there. Keep in mind, there are times when it's necessary to have a printout copy of people's phone numbers and emails because maybe you can't access the computer system to get the information to get the message out to employees. We need to know about the pay policies and practices that are going to be used if the office closes. And this should be done in advance. Who are the key people who are going to work regardless of whether the office closes? Now, there are some people who work in a small office. There are people who work in a very large company. There are people who work in companies that have got multiple offices. There are organizations such as restaurants or other franchises or chains that have several locations. And there needs to be key people who are responsible to make sure that our messages and our people and customers or patrons in these different locations are going to be properly attended to in the unfortunate event that might take place. Also, there are many times where companies say, well, if we're going to be closed, you can telecommute. What are your telecommute practices? Do your practices, preserve the privacy of your information, the confidentiality of information from a client or someone that you do business with or employee information? We're going to ensure that there's remote access to the network. Make sure the system actually works. Now, one of the other things that came up a lot in talking with people in the New York and New Jersey region was damage to property. Whether it's a computer, furniture, original documents, customer or client files, employee files and records. We're going to talk about how do we protect that property and minimize the possible harm that can result. We're going to talk about access to contact information. When you are at home, how are you going to reach out to people, such as your vendors? And then the other thing we're going to talk about is insurance. Now, vendors, which by the way are your computer provider, your bank, the phone company, your cell phone provider, the conference call provider, your payroll company, the copier company, and in your business, many other types of vendors. What happens if the vendor has the unexpected event? Not you, but the vendor. How do they handle those situations? Are they prepared for it? We should review their procedures that they use. Make sure that they have a redundancy program to protect your records and your information. For example, with a payroll company, if they don't have redundancy, how are they going to ensure that your employees are going to be paid on time? How do they back up their systems? Now, some of you work with suppliers. Maybe you're in manufacturing or retail, a restaurant or chain, a movie theater. If you've got suppliers that work with you and they have a situation that affects them, how are you going to be assured that they will deliver even in those situations? One of the other things we're going to be talking about are audits. Audits as well as possible legal claims. Recently, state and federal agencies have invested a lot of money and resources in conducting an increased number of audits. Sometimes these audits are announced, sometimes they're a surprise. And it's important, because this is also an unexpected event, to make sure that the records are in proper form and available in the event that there is an audit. And the burden rests with you as a company to maintain and produce those records to establish that you are complying. Please don't rely on vendors to maintain the records for you. The next part of the program are 10 different scenarios that have been talked about with clients and colleagues over the past few weeks about issues that arose as a result of Sandy, and I wanted to share these with you. The first we're going to talk about is going to be payroll policies and procedures in the company. There are 3 different situations that can arise. A company closes early or has a delayed opening. A company is going to be closed for the day or multiple days. And there are times where a company is open during a storm, but some of the employees do not make it into work that day. Whether the employee could have come in but chose not to, or the employee really was not able to make it in. So one of the other things that arises is overtime for the non-exempt or hourly employees. If you have a policy, for example, that you're going to pay an employee for the full day even if you close early, and the employee has, let's say, an 8-hour shift and they leave after 4 hours, even though you pay the employee for 4 hours, your policy in your employee manual should clearly identify whether you're paying the person for 8 hours or 4 hours, and whether you're going to credit them for overtime purposes with 8 or 4 hours. That way there's no confusion down the road if that person later on in the week winds up working a few more hours. And also, what about employees who are not scheduled to work on a day, for example, when you're closed? You have a policy that you're going to pay people if you close the office for the day, and an employee is not scheduled to work that day. Maybe they have a doctor's appointment, they're taking a personal day or a vacation day. Make it clear in your written policy what you're going to be doing with that employee. All of these things should be spelled out in your employee manuals. One of the problems that has arisen over the past few weeks is that many companies have employee manuals that do not address these situations. One of my colleagues conducted a survey a few weeks ago, and several different companies talked about what their practices are, and in talking also with some of my clients and colleagues, there are some suggested policies that companies use. If you close early and people show up to work that day, many companies actually pay for the full day, a regularly scheduled day for the employees, even if they're leaving early. Let's say, for example, you close at 2 o'clock and people are leaving 3 hours early. You pay them for the full day. Keep in mind, people do commute to work. People showed a commitment or loyalty coming to work that day, and it makes makes good sense to pay them for that full day. People who don't come to work that day may be able to apply a vacation pay, PTO, or personal time off, sick pay, or a floating holiday for the day, and that way they still can get paid, but they're losing a vacation day or some other form of a day. And what do you do if the business closes for the entire day and people are scheduled to work for the day? Should they be paid? And typically the answer is yes. But now, because of something like Sandy, there's another concern that arises. What if you're closed for 2 or 3 days? Or some of my colleagues in New York, actually, their blackout lasted 2 weeks. What do you do then? I think the policy that you create should address that if the office is closed or the business is closed for let's say within a 12-month period, 2 days, you'll pay employees for the 2 days, but not thereafter. That's something that you need to think about and come up with a plan that works for your particular company. The next thing is communicating with employees. The better your line of communication is with the employees, the better the employer-employee relationship typically is. How do you notify employees if there's going to be a closure or a delayed opening or leaving early? If you have second shifts or third shifts, how are you reaching out to people? Is it a blast email? Do you expect employees to reply that they received it? Do you expect employees to acknowledge that they opened the email? Maybe use a send receipt system. Do you have a phone chain like they had in the old days? Make sure that policy is up and running now, and make sure the employees know about it. Also, make it clear how employees are going to notify the company if they are or are not coming to work. Being able to account for the employees is very important. For example, if somebody is coming to work and you close, make sure they know about it so they can turn around and head home. Identify the key people who we mentioned a little while ago, who are responsible for different parts of the business. Make sure they know what their responsibilities are, whether they're working in the office or they're at home. But identify these people in advance. And by the way, have backups. Maybe Gabor is a key person. Have a backup in the event he's not working that day, and someone else is going to be second in command in that part of the business. Another issue that arose is pushing people to work when it's not safe or they feel it's unsafe to come to work. Is there a potential liability to the business if an employee is pushed to come to work and has an accident on the way in? Working from home. If employees are expected to work from home, what are they expected to do? Make sure that they have a clear understanding of what their responsibilities are for when they work from home. Are they logging into the computer and generating work? Are they on business phone calls? Make sure that they have remote access to the computer and they know how to do the work. Another very, very important thing with employees who are working from home is that they understand privacy and confidentiality, and that there is sensitive information that they're working with. Not everybody opens up their laptop, works from home in a private room with no one else around. They need to know what the company's policies are. Last but not least, hourly employees need to track the time they work and make sure those records are reported in on the next day that they show up to work, so you've got track of what those employees are doing. Protect property. We all know that if a tree falls in a building and crashes into the building, or there's a flood or a storm, there is potential damage for property. And there are steps you can do to minimize the consequences of damage to property. One of the things you can do is make sure that documents are scanned into the computer. One of the biggest problems that companies have had in New York with this storm and after 9/11, when the towers went down, is the loss of very, very important documents. If you scan sensitive documents into your computer system, even if the originals are lost, at least you've got copies of that. Have policies in place now with respect to what documents are going to be scanned in, going backwards and going forwards, and where we maintain the originals. It would help your business quite a bit. Backing up the computer. One of the things that shocks me is the number of businesses that use a tape backup system for their computer, but they leave this tape backup in the office. And when they have floods, not only did they lose what was on the computer, they also lost their backup information. Companies that do backup off-site, but back up in the same region, ran into problems that delayed their business for several days, even more than a week. There are companies in New York that used a vendor or more than one vendor in New Jersey to back up their systems. And when New York and New Jersey were affected by the same storm, even though they had a backup system, they had no access to it. So it's good to back up in a different geographic region from where you run your business. Know your vendors and know how to reach them. One thing I suggest strongly is print out a list of your vendors, your account information, the names of the people, phone numbers, email addresses, and have a list of those with very key people 24/7. Keep it in your briefcase. Have one in your home. Have another one in your office. So you have a printout access to this information. And this will make a huge, huge difference. And just go through all the people that you believe are important to reach in the event you cannot open your office for some reason, or you have no access to your office or your computer. So again, it's the computer company, the phone company, your cell phone provider, they may be different, the payroll company, your insurance companies, your banking company, the leases you have for your equipment, and the copier. And I alluded to it earlier, monitoring vendors, because some of the colleagues I've spoken with were not affected by the storm, but their vendors were. And know what the vendor is doing in the event that there is a problem that they have. What are their contingency plans that they have in place? Do they have redundancy? Where do they back up? Make sure they're doing it properly. And you may find that it's a good idea to change vendors, or maybe you'll make a suggestion to a vendor that they can use in the future so they're more secure. Another important aspect of this is insurance. Surprisingly, there are many people in business who do not really understand their own insurance policies, what they cover, what they do not cover. Do they cover the physical property in the office, furniture, your artwork? Do they cover payroll if you have to close for a couple of days? Do they cover lost business? If you close for 2 or 3 days and obviously you're not doing business for those days, will your insurance cover that? What happens with your leases? If, for example, your computer equipment in the office is damaged and you've got a lease on that equipment, typically the lease is actually more expensive than the value of the computer, as considered by the insurance company. How does your insurance cover that? What are your deductibles in the event there are claims arising out of, for example, Sandy? And what kinds of exclusions are there in your policy? You may not realize it, but you may be in a position where you've got flood damage, but you've got a flood exclusion on your insurance policy. Look at your policies, make an appointment to speak with your broker, confirm what you have, and what other products may be more appropriate for your business. And let's talk a bit about the audits. It's such a good idea to be ready now for an audit that takes place sometime, maybe next week, next month, 6 months down the road. And, where are you maintaining the records? Are you scanning records in the computer? Because, by the way, if there is a flood damage in your office and your records are destroyed, for example, payroll records, the auditor is going to view that much the same as a child who tells a teacher, I couldn't do my homework today, Mrs. Clark, because an elephant stepped on my homework. The auditor's not going to buy it, even if it's true. Keep your payroll records in your computer properly backed up, and you'll be fine. Some companies use a mock audit program to make sure that they're maintaining the records and the records are accurate. Not a bad idea to do that once in a while. One of the other issues that arose in the last couple of weeks was the assumption that oh, I don't have to worry about the records. My vendor's got them. And the vendor doesn't keep the records you need to establish in an audit that you're in compliance. So make sure it's your responsibility to hold on to your records. All these things we talked about need to be clearly communicated to the employees and to the key employees so that they are working in tandem to make sure that the policies we implement are going to help you out quite a bit. Here's a bonus point. One of the things that really impressed me is how well organized some of the companies in New York and New Jersey were, that they were reaching out to their customers, their clients, their patrons, and they were able to maintain that contact information even though they had no way to get to their office for more than a week. Knowing how to reach out to people remotely, even if you have no access to your computer, will set you apart from your competition. It is a competitive advantage. Also, make sure that you're aware of deadlines, even if you're at a remote location. Another bonus point I did want to talk about, sadly, there are times where there are fires and other emergencies that take place when people are working. Please have a plan in place. How do you exit the premises? Do you just yell fire and run out the door? Or do you have a plan in place where people will leave, they go to a designated location, they make sure other people are safe and secure, and nobody is left in the building who's not been alerted to this? For example, you may have a person who's deaf, and if there's a fire, people are leaving, and the deaf person doesn't know that anything is going on. How do we handle equipment, such as in a manufacturing company? What's our policy with respect to shutting off the equipment? Maybe we've got data, sensitive data, that we want to get out the door on the way out the door in the event of a fire. How do we preserve other essential information? How do we account for personnel to make sure everyone's out safely and everyone's accounted for? And communication. Many of you on this webinar work with multiple locations. And how do we let other locations know what's going on to make sure that we've got a secure plan in place? Now we're going to review some of the things we talked about. So I couldn't resist using the first one. It's called closure. Closure in the program and closure with respect to when you do actually close your business. Have a printed list of the contact information for the employees, multiple phone numbers, cell, home, email addresses, and your vendors, and have that available at home, not just in the office. Make the pay policies and practices clear to employees by putting that in your employee manual if it's not there already, and then speak to that with the employees so they know in advance what to expect. Have a plan for contacting employees when you do close, and people maybe on a second or a third shift, or part-time people, or people who are in the field. Make it clear what you expect of your employees in all respects, and let them know what they can expect of you. And make sure key employees and their backups are prepared for the work they're going to do. We talked about protecting the property, scanning files in, scanning data in. Understand your insurance policies. Talk to your insurance providers. Challenge them. Find out what other products are out there. Make them earn the money. Takeaways from vendors. Know how your vendors handle situations that arise. Talk about their disaster planning, what they're going to do if they have the event, and then also that audit we talked about. Be prepared in advance. For example, if you have a wage and an hour audit, what are the relevant documents you're going to need? You need time cards. You need what hours of the day they worked, the number of hours they worked, paychecks, pay stubs, to show they were paid every penny they're entitled to. You've got the burden to be able to produce that information. Maybe it's an immigration audit by INS. Are you filling out all the proper forms like I-9 forms? Are you maintaining them in a separate place in the office? Review and make sure you're ready for any possible audit that can arise in advance. Because once the audit starts, you can't generate documents going backwards. So it's important to be ready for that. Thank you so much for attending the webinar today. I hope that some of the things that we talked about will help you in your business so that you avoid many of the problems that people shared with me as a result of Sandy. And I hope that you realize that a lot of what we talked about doesn't take that much time to implement, but it would be so beneficial to your organization if you take the time to kick around these ideas in your company. And also, in addition, there may be other things that are unique to your business that you can consider so that if there are events in the future, that you're ready to handle them. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, David. That was very informative and certainly a lot to consider. And thank you for everyone for attending this webinar. A recording will be available on the Wagner Law Group website very shortly. And please feel free to contact David if you have any questions or if you'd like him to help you prepare for the unexpected. Thank you very much.